Okay, and welcome to my guide on how to use manual engine controls. Now, the first thing you'll need to do is assign all the controls, which you can go through. They're pretty simple. You've got oil radiator, mixture and prop pitch. And then you've also got supercharger stages. So we're going to go through what all these things do. Now, the radiators, if I swivel this around, are pretty self-explanatory. So if I open them full, you can see the oil radiator there at the front, opening and closing, and the water radiator at the back. And it's pretty self-explanatory. The more you open it, the more cooling you get, but the more drag you get, so the slower the top speed of your plane will go. Using that on manual can be to your advantage, because if you're climbing, so you're not particularly travelling that fast, but you're running the engine hard, you can open the radiators right out, because you're not going to generate that much difference in speed, because the drag's not going to be that much because you're only travelling slow, but you'll be able to cool the engine more and so climb harder for longer. Or if you're going to want to really run away and burn, you can shut the radiators right down and knacker your engine and try and get away. But they're pretty simple. So we'll just open them up. I'm not too worried in this at the moment. So the next thing will be mixture, which we'll look into. And also combined with that, we'll have the manifold pressure, which is here on the Yak. Now this is a Yak 1, which currently has both not all the planes have radiator and oil radiator and radiator controls. Some it's just not enabled yet because they're still improving everything, and some just didn't have it. Some planes didn't have it at all. But we'll, while we've took off, we'll quickly cover prop pitch. So your prop pitch control on most aircraft, some of it automatic, but as you can see, as I reduce prop pitch, you can see the engine RPM go down, and basically it's a bit like a governor. The prop will try and keep the engine at that RPM, so even if I reduce throttle, it'll stay at that RPM. Really, it will only be used for trying to run the engine more efficiently to save fuel. You're probably never going to use it in War Thunder as it currently is played. So it's really, you might as well just leave it at 100% all the time. The next thing, well, the only plane that is an exception to that is the 109E, which it has no automatic prop pitch control. So what happens there is, as you go faster, the engine just revs more and you have to turn the prop pitch back down. It's such a pain in the arse to fly with it. Like every time you're going to go into a dive, you've got to either reduce the prop pitch in advance, then go into a dive, or continuously adjust it as you go, and it's a total pain in the arse, to be honest. So normally I just leave that in auto. If you want to do that, it's up to you if you want to get that into it, but personally I just think it's getting a bit far. So the next thing we'll come across is mixture. Now the mixture, basically you want to have it as high as possible for the altitude you're at. And as you gain altitude though and the manifold pressure drops, you'll have to reduce the mixture to keep the engine running smooth. If I increase the mixture on this, the engine will probably start to run. Yeah, there you go, look, there you go, it starts running rough, you see, as it's too rich. Again, to save fuel efficiency, you can reduce the mixture, but there's pretty much no point in this. You want to keep it as high as possible, up to 100% at least, to get the maximum power possible for the altitude, for whatever altitude you can. So, and of course you can increase that with supercharger staging. But there's a trick with supercharger staging. Now we're going to have a look at this. Now I've got up altitude. If I change to the next supercharger stage, you can see it boosts the pressure up there. So you can see that go up and down. Now you're going to think, oh well, you know, you want to just keep it maximum all the time. So as soon as it starts dropping, you want to change supercharger gear. That's not quite the correct thing to do though. we'll see. This will take a little while just to accelerate up, but you've got to understand how a supercharger works to realise why. A supercharger is directly driven and geared from the crankshaft. So all the power that all the power to compress that air with the fan is being taken directly from the crankshaft of the engine. So on aircraft, some had like separate second superchargers, or they'd have two gearing stages. So you'd have a low gear for low altitude, then it would change gearing stage to spin it faster for high altitude. And of course, the more you're compressing the thin air to make it to bring up the pressure for the engine, the more power it's using to do that. So a good plane to demonstrate this on would be sort of something like the FU4, with its got the same engine basically as the P47, but the P47 has a turbocharger where it had a 3-stage supercharger system. Now at ground level, both of those engines pretty much, the P47 had a turbo supercharger system, so it had like a first stage supercharger, so at ground level that's doing most of the work, and both of them make about exactly the same horsepower. But as you go up, the FU4 has to change supercharger stage, and so every stage it's losing 100 or 200 horsepower to drive the supercharger harder and harder and harder. Whereas the P47 with a turbocharger, which I'll explain how that works a bit later, doesn't suffer from that problem. So when a P47's at 7,000 metres, it still has the engine can make the same power as it did at 1,000 metres, whereas the FU4 may be 300 horsepower less. Right, okay, we've pretty much reached the max speed we can at this, so we're going to change supercharger stages, and if you see, our speed actually starts to reduce because the amount of power we lost from the pressure drop was less than the amount of power required to drive the next supercharger stage. That's, as you can see now, so it's just about this altitude, about 2,500 metres for this plane, that would be right to change supercharger stage. Now if we go higher still, we'll see mixture effects come in. But just getting back, yeah, as you can see, that next supercharger stage stuck a lot of power, so you don't want to just run in supercharger stage 2 if you're running on the ground, because you're losing a couple of hundred horsepower off the engine. And there you can see the mixture. You can see the engine's going crazy, we're losing loads of power, it's not running properly, but if we reduce the mixture a bit, there you go, it smooths right out, it starts running nicely again. So, as you'll see, the higher altitude you get, as you see the engine's running rough, we have to reduce the mixture more and it becomes smooth. So, the less power we make as we're having to reduce the mixture, the higher the altitude you get. That's one of the problems of not having a very good supercharger system. But the other problem, as I was explaining, as you have to engage more and more stages or more gearing on the supercharger to keep the pressure high, then the more you have to use up power from the crankshaft of the engine to create that extra boost pressure. So that's why you always want to be on the lowest supercharger stage possible. You don't want to change supercharger stage just as the pressure's dropping. You want to, you want to wait until it's dropped quite a bit and then change stage. But there's also one other system which I did mention before, the turbo supercharger on the P47. It's the only one which has this modelled fairly well. And so we'll go and have a look at that next. So here we are in the P47, pretty much the same thing. We've both got oil radiator and controls, but there's one extra control we can enable, which allows us to change the amount of pressure coming out of the turbocharger. So on a P47 the engine had basically a smallish first stage supercharger on the engine, which helped distribute the mixture and blow the air into the cylinders. It gives you quite a bit of boost at sea level, but anything above that, basically the turbocharger would provide all the extra pressure all the way up to its maximum altitude. Now a turbocharger runs by taking the hot exhaust from the engine, basically blowing it through a fan and then using that to drive the compressor fan for the boost air. The advantage of this is that the boosted the pressure boost you get doesn't cost any engine power. It's all using waste engine power. All the power coming from the exhaust is just all the heat in the exhaust is just waste energy. So the higher in altitude we get, and the more the turbocharger takes up keeps the pressure equal, the engine keeps the same power because it's just using waste energy from the engine to do so. Let's kill this. So that's the big advantage of having a turbocharger. But to fit it in this plane, that's why this plane is so massive, because of all the turbocharger in this was behind the pilot's cockpit, and all the ducting to carry all the air from one to the other and to carry the air back again, and everything else took up a huge amount of room, which is why the P-47 was just massive and super heavy. But it lets it have its high performance good performance at high altitude, because unlike other planes, its engine's making precisely the same pressure at precisely the same power at high altitude as it is at low altitude, because all the extra boost is being provided by otherwise waste energy from the engine. So that's the only difference. Everything else is the same. Once you get above the altitude that the pressure can be provided by the turbocharger, then you have to start reducing the mixture just like any other aeroplane. Everything else works exactly the same, and currently it's the only plane which has a manual control for this. As you can see, I can make it rev up and down, but it doesn't actually work as it's supposed to, according to the US Air Force's guide on how to fly the P-47, which you can watch the video of on YouTube. So that's basically it. It's not that difficult to do manual engine management once you get used to it. You do have to learn kind of the various altitudes at which it's best to switch over your supercharger stages and things like that. It's different for every plane configuration with its engine and everything else, so it is a matter of learning for every plane. And there are a few aircraft which that's an exception for, such as there's some they haven't made cockpits for, so you can't see the pressure gauges, so unless you know what it's set to, it's very difficult to know what to do with it, because there's no cockpits yet. Like the Beaufighter, I think the P-63, the new weird looking American one, you can't tell what you're going to do with it. So apart from that, it's fairly simple, and you can use the radiator controls to gain a bit of boost as well. When you need it, like this, I can open these both up flat out, full them out, so I can wet for longer climbing that would otherwise be a low speed. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching the guide, and if there's anything else you'd like to know, or any specific questions, let me know and maybe I'll make a video about it. That's Mad Kite out.